This is episode 319 of That Shakespeare Life. That Shakespeare Life is made possible by listeners just like you who sign up to be our patrons. Join us today at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife and stay tuned after the episode for even more details.
Hi, I'm Chris Lautaris, the author of Shakespeare's book about the Shakespeare First Folio. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
But not all glass was imported. England had its own glass-making industry and produced a glass, what we call now today, forest glass. It had a distinctive dark green tint and a charm of its own.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
In Shakespeare's plays, he uses the word glass over 80 times, including to talk about specific kinds of glass, like a pilot's glass in All's Well That Ends Well, and the glasses of my sight in Coriolanus. We can see from the surviving building of Shakespeare's Birthplace in Stratford Upon Avon that window glass existed for this time period, and there was even an old glass house in the Blackfriars where the Blackfriars Theatre was located. But how was all this glass made? What materials were used? What other products might have been made from glass? And were there different colors of glass available? To find out the answers to all of these questions and explore the history of glass and glass making for Shakespeare's lifetime, we are delighted to welcome Allen Loomis to the show today. Allen Loomis is a doctoral candidate in the Department of English at Binghamton University. His work examines the confluence of the domestic sphere and the public theater in Elizabethan and Jacobean England. He specializes in the transformative role of window glass technology during this period and argues that shifts in window glass production changed how public theater participated with the home and the other social sections of society. His approach to examining the influence of material culture on theater has earned him grants from the Corning Museum of Glass and Harper College at Binghamton University. Hello, Allen. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Hello, Cassidy. Thanks for having me.
In Shakespeare's play, As You Like It, Touchstone talks about pouring out a cup into a glass. What type of glass products were available during the 16th and 17th century, and what are some of the markers for identifying glass artifacts from this time period?
Sure. So great question. In Shakespeare's England, glass was, what I argue at least, was a familiar sight, although it was through various forms and functions. People would have encountered all sorts of things like mirrors and hourglasses to pieces of jewelry. Among these, Venetian drinking glass vessels stood out as like the pinnacle of luxury. This type of glass, known as cristallo, was exceptionally clear and belonged to the most affluent as prized possessions. But not all glass was imported. England had its own glass-making industry and produced a glass, what we call now today, forest glass. It had a distinctive dark green tint and a charm of its own, and it was probably more common to people in England at this time. Additionally, stained glass could be seen in the windows of churches and adorning the homes of the aristocracy. So even if you did not have glass yourself, it was something that you would have likely been exposed to in some way living in England.
How prevalent was the use of glass for windows, and how expensive was it in terms of would the cost of glass influence whether some homes had glass windows where others might not?
So the use of glass windows in England has a very long history. We have many accounts dating back to the 13th century. For example, King Henry III requesting that glass be repaired or added to windows at his numerous properties. And then again, at Kenilworth Castle, John of Gaunt in the 14th century added some of the largest bay windows in England at the time. The glass filling these windows would have likely been stained glass or relatively opaque, a plain version of forest glass, often referred to now as early forest glass. However, closer to Shakespeare's time, Elizabeth Tudor, while imprisoned at Woodstock Castle in 1554, famously engraved the couplet, quote, "Much suspected by me, nothing proved can be," on a glass window, which later became a type of tourist attraction for many visiting the region. There is some debate about how often window glass was used and by whom, with scholars like R.J. Charleston arguing that it was more common down the social scale than is typically recognized. What is more clear is that these glass windows were not yet to provide a view of the outside or to allow those outside to view within the home. They were decorative, translucent barriers that were to be looked upon to allow some light into the home or to provide ventilation as necessary.
We recently followed an activity outlined in Hugh Platt's book from the 1580s called The Jewel House of Art and Nature. We did this on our YouTube channel, where Hugh outlined a method for thinning parchment paper to be used in place of glass, specifically for a window. And this brings up some questions for me in terms of what window glass was like for Shakespeare's lifetime. What can you tell us about window glass specifically? I mean, was glass the primary material for windows in a home, for instance? And when glass was used, how clear was it? You're suggesting that they weren't trying to see through it, but I wouldn't think that parchment, I mean, when we did this activity, you couldn't see through it at all. I mean, the light comes through, but was that the purpose?
So for most people outside the aristocracy, glass was not the common barrier for windows. It was more common that thin parchment paper, like you mentioned, wooden lattices or other means were used instead of glass. If glass was used outside the aristocracy leading up to Shakespeare's lifetime, it was ordinary plain and called white glass with that notable green tint. This glass was, like we mentioned, translucent but not transparent. You could not see through it. It allowed the transmission of light, which was its primary purpose. Usually there was some sort of opening mechanism where you could allow for ventilation. It was not yet used for an inward or outward view. It makes us think about our world today and imagining our lives or windows if they were this type of glass where you couldn't see outside. And I think that's something that oftentimes we take for granted and is a huge shift from now compared to then, where window glass was primarily used, just like I said, for light and ventilation. You weren't really looking outside yet, or people weren't looking inside.
Now, you've referred a couple of times to forest glass, that green, very distinctly associated with England kind of glass. Tell us about how this was made. And obviously that stands in contrast to the Venetian glass that you mentioned, which was crystal clear and you could see right through it. So what's the difference in methods that affect the appearance of these glass and the quality of it?
So there's a lot of really interesting history on English glassmaking. So forest glass was made in England for centuries leading up to Shakespeare's lifetime by glassmaking families. And these families would guard their secrets and pass down their methods across generations. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of documentation because they were very secretive. So we don't have a whole lot of details on their exact methodology or processes. However, we do have some archaeological evidence at various furnaces that we find in, say, the Weald of Surrey and Sussex that give us clues about what they were doing to make the glass. One thing is certain, though, is that timber was an essential fuel source, so the proximity to wooded areas was crucial for making window glass. And the ingredients from these forests were responsible for that natural green tint of forest glass. And this is caused by the iron oxides in the sand and the ashes of beechwood and bracken. As the timber was depleted, these glassmaking families, they were peripatetic. They would move around and set up new furnaces where the resources were plentiful again. However, due to the Reformation and the dissolution of the monasteries, by the mid-16th century, the glass industry in England was in serious decline. Eleanor Godfrey argues that by the 1550s, window glass production had likely ceased, and the process of making window glass, long held by these glassmaking families, had been lost. But in the second half of the century, especially during Shakespeare's lifetime, England witnessed a building boom, often referred to as the Great Rebuilding. This brought with it a new demand for window glass, which glassmaking immigrants from France capitalized on, and they ended up revitalizing the English glass industry. And this is the start of what is called the production of late forest glass, which is a notable shift.
Was there any significant technological or methodological advancement in window glass production during Shakespeare's time that impacted its use in architecture and homes? Were these glass-making immigrants from France changing the way all of this was done?
Absolutely. So in 1567, one key figure, Jean Carey, arrived in London. Carey successfully petitioned Elizabeth's government to establish a monopoly for his business and was granted a license to build glass houses for window glass. The quality of window glass with him and his company coming to England improved substantially. This is that marker, that moment where we, from Carey onwards, we start to call England's glass late forest glass because it was much clearer. It had a dark blue-green tint, and it was much more uniform in appearance than the earlier glass. This development was the catalyst of what Marc Girard called the Great Age of Elizabethan glass. The new glass sparked a glass mania of sorts that influenced wealthy Elizabethan builders to begin fashioning their homes with expansive bay windows and literally like a ton of window glass. The marvel of this new transparent glass technology introduced by Carew and his company was displayed for Elizabeth in the summer of 1575, which I believe we've talked about or we've heard from you on the podcast before. Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, hosted Elizabeth at Kenilworth Castle for 19 days, orchestrating one of the most impressive country house entertainments of the period. Dudley spent nearly a decade renovating Kenilworth before the event, so like right around the same time as the new glassmakers have arrived in England. During his renovations, he constructed a 3-story apartment block featuring spacious bay windows, allowing Elizabeth to preside over the festivities outside while remaining visible to all the attendees. The innovative windows that were designed to captivate the audience and inspire awe when Elizabeth kind of appeared behind the transparent glass panes to watch the courtyard entertainment below. So like this was a huge spectacle. Not only, is the Queen there, but for the first time, people are able to see the Queen on the other side of the transparent glass windows. And they can see her watching them. And they also in the courtyard can watch her and what she's doing and the guests and people inside the apartment block that Dudley built for her. There is an account of this by Robert Lanham. He describes Elizabeth's apartment block and the windows. I'll kind of read it for you here because I think it's really great. So he says, every room so spacious, so well lighted, and so high roofed within, so seemly to sight by due proportion without, at daytime on every side so glittering by glass, and nights by continual brightness of candle, fire, and torchlight. Keyword, transparent through the lightsome winds, as if it were the Egyptian pharaohs relucent unto all the Alexandrian coast. So here Lanham articulates what it would be like to see light cascade through Kenilworth's new gleaming glass windows and what a spectacle it would have been to see Elizabeth, the Queen, on the other side of these windows for the first time. These new windows played an essential role balancing the Queen's position as the entertainment's most important participant and observer. Positioned in these windows, the Queen watched the local men and women perform the Hawk Tuesday play and bear baiting in the courtyard. And transparent glass, introduced by the immigrants from France for the first time, intensified spectatorship in ways that the previous early forest glass, translucent glass, could not. So starting with Dudley's entertainment of 1575, enduring throughout the remainder of her rule, there is this building aristocratic desire to host Elizabeth and to have her displayed on the other side of transparent glass windows. And this shift inspires some of the most dramatic architecture and building of the period.
So let's explore some of this artwork and artwork through architecture of different buildings. What about houses like Bess of Hardwicke's Hardwicke Hall and Christopher Hatton's Holdenby House? How did these prominent builders incorporate new glass technologies?
Sure. So Hardwicke Hall and Hatton's Holdenby are examples of what scholars call Elizabethan lantern houses. These were houses that would be perched on top of a hill, oftentimes built to host the Queen. They would have these huge glass facades, and they were more than mere dwellings. They were symbols of the builders' affluence and social standing. And for some, they were used as like stepping stones. Like, for example, we talked about Kenilworth for Robert Dudley. And for others, they were so expensive to create, and especially all the glass was incredibly expensive, they could turn into economic pitfalls. So this happened with Christopher Hatton at Holdenby. But one key feature of these lantern houses that were being built in the period was that they all had huge, expansive glass facades. Each house that would be built, it seemed like they were trying to outdo the other. You had Kenilworth by Dudley, And then you had Cecil and Tybald's, another lantern house and palace that Cecil used to host Elizabeth quite often. And then you have Hatton's, Holdenby, and later on Bess of Hardwick's Hardwick Hall. And there's many others as well.
Were there notable differences in the use and quality of window glass between rural and urban settings during Shakespeare's lifetime? I think about Shakespeare's New Place, for example. Would he have used glass in his windows there after the purchase and renovation of his Stratford home?
When Shakespeare acquired New Place in 1597, it was already one of Stratford Upon Avon's largest and most prominent homes. And it was initially constructed by Hugh Clopton in the 15th century. And Clopton served as alderman, sheriff, and Lord Mayor in London, very wealthy guy. And the house was built opposite the town's guild chapel, which made like New Place a place of attention where passerbys on the busy street below they would be attracted to it, its size and its prime location. It was something that would garner attention. When Shakespeare buys the house in 1597, he takes this house that was kind of in a bit of disrepair, but was a huge house, and completely renovates it. And in the process of that renovation, he adds expansive bay windows. Like we've seen at lantern houses, we start to see this now in places like Stratford and even in London, where now you have these urban buildings with facades full of glass. So Shakespeare adds glass windows, a gallery, and there are all sorts of fun accounts, and it comes later after Shakespeare has died, but thinking about Shakespeare at these windows, looking down at the street below, and people seeing him writing in his window and him watching the daily life of the passersby and thinking of some of his great plays and hearing what people are saying on the street below. And there are even some accounts like we have of Elizabeth almost a century prior writing on her glass window. There are accounts after Shakespeare's death and later owners of New Place where there are believed to be engravings on the glass windows by Shakespeare and his family. Whether that's true or not sure, but those accounts do exist, and people think about Shakespeare shortly after his death being at those windows at New Place.
We know that in the late 16th and early 17th century, the fuel for making glass changed from wood to coal. What motivated this change, and how did the different fuel change the color of the glass that was produced?
So in the late 16th century, glass production was booming in England, much different than a century prior. And so was domestic building and notably shipbuilding, which was incredibly important for England. Timber became a highly sought after resource and was quickly depleted in England. With the introduction of coal as a fuel source, this would kind of like set off that depletion and give an alternative to burning up all the timber. England was so concerned with the depletion of its forests in 1615, James I decreed in a proclamation that timber could no longer be used as a fuel source for glassmaking. So what would happen before James's proclamation was that you would often have your glassmaking furnaces set up close to your house or the house that you were building, so that large amounts of glass could be made on site because it was so expensive to produce the glass and it was a fragile product to transport. But with the introduction of coal, you could now have glass furnaces anywhere, including in London. So it became more economically feasible for glassmakers as they are no longer bound to a location that was near a forest. Overall, the quality of glass was still likely around the same at this time, but the new benefit of location and availability of a new fuel resource helped glass eventually become cheaper and more widely available into the late 17th century, where we see some really substantial advancements in glassmaking, including the introduction of lead glass by George Ravenscroft.
Well, there's obviously a lot of history to unpack here about glass and the history of it. What are some of your recommended resources, places you can point us towards where if we want to explore this further, where should we start?
So number one for me is the Rockow Research Library at the Corning Museum of Glass. They offer glass grants for people interested in doing research on glass. And they have a ton of resources, a library, the Rockow Research Library, where you can go and visit. It's in Corning, New York. And I actually was lucky enough to receive one of the grants that I had mentioned this last summer and was able to go to places like Hardwick Hall and Kenilworth Castle and see these sites firsthand and do some of the glass research. So number one, definitely the Rockow Research Library at the Corning Museum of Glass. And then I would say next would be Eleanor Godfrey's book, The History of Glassmaking. that really identifies the shift that I've been talking about in the 1550s, 1560s, from translucent glass and an industry that was in decline to the introduction of the French immigrants and a new higher quality and more transparent glass product. And then how that trickled into the built environment and then into works by playwrights like Shakespeare.
Those are excellent resources. Allen has actually provided a list of great in-depth resources you can use to explore different kinds of glass, different uses of it, the development of English glass making, and several others. So we will place a complete list of the resources he recommends in the show notes for today, as well as a direct link to the Rackow Research Library at the Corning Museum of Glass if you'd like to explore that further. Now, Allen, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
Sure. So way out of my time period and doesn't really have anything to do with glass, but I would definitely pick The Great Gatsby. It's just my first favorite book that I read as, in an English class in high school, and has stayed with me, and I continue to go back to, over the years. So,
well, I'm very happy about that selection. It's one of my favorites as well. And I don't think anyone has picked that yet on our show. So that's a wonderful selection for your deserted island. Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
So I'm getting really close to finishing my dissertation. So that's a huge milestone.
Yay! Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm almost there, maybe a few months. I'm working on my last chapter and then revising the whole thing. So I'm getting there. I'm hoping by the end of summer, I will be finished with that. And then moving on to what's next and entering the job market. But other projects I'm working on an article about Queen Elizabeth and her glass engraving that I mentioned just very little bit about at Woodstock, how that became kind of like a sensation and a tourist attraction of sorts. And then I'm also working on a project with Bess of Hardwick and her involvement within the glass industry, and as like a pioneer of the glass industry and building, and the what she accomplished at Hardwick Hall. So those are the two big things I'm involved in right now and diligently working on.
Well, we will look forward to seeing your dissertation come to fruition, and very exciting things coming for you. And we will look forward to staying in touch and following the work that you produce, because I definitely want to hear more about Bess of Hardwick and her involvement with the glass industry. I don't think I've ever heard that connection, and I can't wait to see what you produce. Thank you so much, Allen Loomis, for being here today and taking us through the history of glass and glass making for Shakespeare's lifetime and helping us understand this part of his life that much better. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
If you would like to see an organized and clickable list of the resources Allen recommends for you today, along with links to related episodes about glass and even more information on Allen and his work, you can visit the show notes for today's episode at cassidycash.com/EP319. While you're on our show notes page, if you would like a more in-depth look at the research that went into today's episode, including examples of types of glass we're discussing, stained glass, drinking vessels made of glass, as well as other primary documents and museum artifacts related to the history of glass from Shakespeare's lifetime, then use the Become a Patron button to log in or join us as a patron, and all these extras will expand right on the show notes page. Again, that URL is cassidycash.com/episode319. That's cassidycash.com/EP319. That Shakespeare Life is powered by our patrons. Patrons of our show get unlimited access to all of our detailed show notes, over 150 bonus episodes of our show, and special insider extras, including a video library, animated versions of Shakespeare's plays, and a collection of educator resources like hands-on history activity kits that help you take our podcast into your classroom. Find out more, explore all the extras, and sign up today at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife. That's patreon.com/thatshakespearelife. That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.